Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, October the 10th. And welcome to our commentary. There's some new information that came out today, some new inflation information, some new pricing information that came out. I haven't had a chance to get into it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next video. But I think it basically says that the pace of inflation came down, but not as much as they were expecting. One of those reports. I don't think it's a good report for the Harris campaign. That's my impression. But we will get into more of that tomorrow. Speaking of the Harris campaign, the vice presidential candidate, Governor Walz, is out there saying some pretty controversial things. First of all, he wants to do away with the filibuster, and he wants to do away with the Electoral College. Now, neither these things are not going to happen. I mean, this is just a lot of rhetorical, wishful thinking. A lot of times, Democrats say these things when they're speaking to a very liberal audience. It's like a brownie point, if you will, to get some brownie points from very liberal audiences. I understand he was in California when he said that. But in order to change the Electoral College, you have to have an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which, of course, that means the Congress has to pass it, the Senate has to pass it, the president has to sign it, and here comes the impossible task. It has to go to the state legislatures, and 3/4 of the 50 state legislatures would have to approve it. It's just not going to happen. You don't have 3/4 of the legislatures that are going to buy into eliminating the Electoral College, okay? Especially after the reality of what we have in the country today, where you got these big cities voting for one party. I mean, if we didn't have the Electoral College, look, the presidency of the United States would be decided in California or in LA or New York. That's where some of the large cities are. So that's never going to happen. But it's just a lot of, again, rhetorical wishful thinking on the part of the Democrats. And it would be curious to ask Vice President Harris if she agrees with her candidate for vice president, Governor Walz. It'd be interesting to ask that question, because I've never heard Kamala Harris talk about the Electoral College. She has said something about the filibuster. I think she said it when she first ran for president back in 2020. But I don't think she has said anything like that here recently. But again, it's just a lot of rhetorical wishful thinking, talking to friendly audiences, keeping friendly audiences, cheering and clapping for a campaign that at the moment doesn't look, frankly, that strong. I think you're beginning to see more and more people look at these campaigns and favor Trump, or at least believe more and more that Trump is going to win. So we will see who wins. But I think, again, these remarks by Governor Walz about the Electoral College and the filibuster, just a lot of rhetorical wishful thinking. That's all that it is. I got to tell you one quick thing here before we get to our topic. Every time that I see Governor DeSantis on television conducting one of these briefings, I mean, the guy is impressive. That's all I can tell you. He is an impressive leader. He's an impressive governor. And I think for some of us, and I wanted DeSantis to run in 2024, and for a while there, I wasn't really sure if I was going to support Trump, but now I am, of course. But I was hoping that maybe he could go as the VP. But J.D. Vance is doing a pretty good job too. So I guess we just have a surplus of talent at the moment on the GOP. But if J.D. Vance is indeed the vice president, in 3 months or whatever, more than likely he's got a shot at winning the nomination in 2028. So I don't know what happens to DeSantis, but he looks impressive every time. Every time he talks, he looks very impressive. Now, if Trump loses, I don't think that's going to happen. But if Trump loses in 2024, then I think there's going to be a clean slate. And without question, DeSantis would have to be the leading candidate for 2028. But then that's a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen in the future. But right now, I got to tell you that I'm always very impressed every time I see Governor DeSantis. He just looks like a man in control, a man who knows what the heck he's doing. He's very competent whenever he gets behind that microphone. Well, I've got a post over at the American Thinker today talking about the second gentleman, that is Kamala Harris' husband. And there are now two newspaper reports about his behavior. The first one was about hitting a woman, and now the second one is about some of his workplace activities and some of his workplace reputation. Look, I have no idea if any of this is true. I really don't. I don't have any sources or any contact with any of the people who are sourcing this article or these two articles. The only thing I know is that if articles like that came out about a Republican, like J.D. Vance, for example, or Ron DeSantis, that those would be covered by the media. And I think it's a shame. It's a shame that the media has gotten so politicized that people, have the cynical attitude that I just said. That if this was a Republican, it would be a story, and the Republican would be asked about it in every press conference. He would be asked about it in every press conference, and he would be forced to deny it or whatever. And I think that's very sad that we've gotten to a point where people have the cynical attitude that if it's a Republican, they would cover it. If it's a Democrat, they don't cover it. And I don't think that's good for the country. I don't think it's good for the media, as we've seen with 60 Minutes and all this editing that they did. And I think it's hurting the media. And that's what I feel. I think it's hurting the media more than anything else at a time, I think, when the country really needs a good media. We need an honest media because there are some serious problems. And the best way to know if the politicians are leveling with us is if we have an honest media. And right now, I'm not sure. I think most of the reporters are honest. Most of the ones I've interacted with over the years have been good people, and they've treated me fairly. But when you see a story like this that you know would be covered if the politician was a Republican, then you have to wonder. Well, I've got a post coming out tomorrow about Latinos, and particularly Latinos in Nevada and Arizona. That's what the story is about. But the fact that more and more Hispanic men are moving to Trump, and people are wondering why is that happening. And in the article that I wrote, I'm going to publish tomorrow, I have 4 reasons as to why I believe Hispanic men are moving toward Trump. The first one is the economy, inflation. Look, if you're a man, very likely you're supporting a family or you have a family, and you know how painful this inflation has been on you and on your family. It puts a lot of pressure on families when the inflation is like this. And I think that's an issue, the economy. The second issue, I believe, is these cultural differences where, you have, if you're a father, for example, and you have a daughter, you have to hear all this garbage about a man pretending to be a woman, potentially competing for a trophy with your daughter. I just don't think most fathers, most men, want that kind of a situation for their daughter. I think they, respect someone who has gender issues or whatever, but, don't play against my daughter. Or don't compete against my daughter and potentially take her trophy away. And as more and more people are beginning to worry about national security and the impact of all these international problems, the border definitely is a national security issue. This really very dangerous international situation with Iran, with Israel, with Russia, with China, the border. And I think a lot of guys are concerned that Kamala Harris is not strong enough to deal with these issues. And I think the fourth reason is, frankly, that I think a lot of guys are beginning to think that the Democrat Party is too feminized, that they seem to only be talking about women's issues. And in fact, the Harris campaign is going out of its way to focus on men. If you've noticed a lot of their commercials lately, the character in the commercial is a guy, a man in the commercial talking about this or that, tax cuts or whatever. So they understand they have a problem, which is why they're targeting men in their commercials. So I think those are the reasons right there. Those are the reasons why I believe that men are moving in the direction of Trump. National security, the economy, cultural issues, and the fact that the Democrat Party has become very feminized. In fact, to me, the best picture of the Democratic Party today is that program on television, The View. That's your Democrat Party right there. That show every week, I guess at noon or whatever, that show is the Democrat Party. Those 4 or 5 ladies on that show, that's your Democrat Party. That's what the party stands for. And I think a lot of men look at that and say, no, I don't want anything to do with that at the moment. I think a lot of women do too, but that's for another show. Well, let me leave you with a little historical note. On this day in 1973, Spiro Agnew resigned the presidency. Spiro Agnew was Richard Nixon's vice president. He ran with Nixon in 68 and 72. And frankly, a lot of people thought he was going to be the nominee for president in 1976, being the vice president. Many people thought he would be the likely successor. But he got into some trouble, and stories came out that he had taken money or bribes or whatever when he was governor of Maryland, and it just kind of all exploded very quickly. And within a very short time, he was gone. He resigned. And that was the end of Spiro Agnew. And that was the last time we even heard of him. Nobody really knew who he was before he was nominated. In 1968, there was a joke that said Spiro who? And then, in 5 years, he's gone. And after he left the vice presidency, I don't think he had too many public appearances. He passed away a few years ago. I know he wrote a book one time. But that's it. Spiro Agnew, one of the great names of American politics, Spiro Agnew. I think he was of Greek descent. Either his parents or his great-grandparents were Greek immigrants who came to Maryland, and he went into politics and became the governor of Maryland in 1968 in a very surprising move, completely surprising move. Richard Nixon, the nominee for president, selected him as vice president. And nobody believed it. A lot of people were surprised that Nixon did that. They thought he would pick maybe another governor, but there it was. The Nixon-Agnew ticket. They won the presidency in 68, and then they swept the country in 72, winning 49 states, over 60% of the popular vote, one of the biggest landslides in American history. And a year later, literally less than a year later, Spiro Agnew resigns, and he's become one of the great trivia questions of all time. Who was Spiro Agnew? Well, now we know. He was replaced as vice president by Gerald Ford, who less than a year later became president of the United States when Richard Nixon resigned. So that was a really interesting period in American history, 1973, 1974, when we had a vice president resign. We had a president resign, and we ended up with Gerald Ford as president and Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. You talk about some trivia questions. You want to win some trivia questions, try those. Who was president and vice president in 1976? Gerald Ford and Nelson Rockefeller. Great trivia questions to say the least. Thank you for listening. Everybody have a wonderful day. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.